we're leaving, hang on, just let me press the button for it to go out. We're live.
Thank you everyone and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee. We have one item of business on the agenda, and that's to receive and scrutinise the report for the proposed changes to education at Castle Corinion, with a recommendation from officers to close the school. As we move on to the agenda, can I ask for any apologies that have been received?
Chair, we've got 4 apologies from Graham Robson, co-opted member, County Councillors Tim Van Rees, Edwin Roderick and David Jones, and also from Emma Palmer.
Thank you for that. I just had a message that Councillor Amanda Jenner is struggling to get into the meeting at the moment, and so we'll be slightly late. In which case, can we move on to the formal disclosures? Can I confirm that there are no disclosures of interest in relation to this meeting?
None.
And finally, can I ask whether anyone has a disclosure of a party whip in contravention of section 78(3) of the Local Government Measure 2011? I realise most of the members of this committee who are in political groupings, there are position statements that have been made by those groups. But I would remind you here that you're here today as scrutiny members, not as members of any group or party, and you'll be conducting your scrutiny of what is in front of you, not what your own parties have put forward as alternatives. So can I have confirmation that that no one has received a party whip in respect of any business?
None.
In which case, could I invite portfolio holder Councillor Phil Davis to introduce this section and pass things across to officers to introduce the business of today in respect of Castle Corinion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, you don't want to hear from me, so I'll move swiftly over to Marianne. I think I'll start on this one. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Right, bear with me, I'm just getting my notes up. Right, okay, so this is the consultation report following the consultation that was held earlier this year on the proposal to close Castle Corinion Church in Wales Primary School. So a bit of background, Castle Corinion is a primary school. It's a Church in Wales primary school located in the catchment of Llanfair Corinion, or Corinion High School. It has 23 pupils on roll, and we consulted earlier this spring, and this is now the outcome of that consultation. So you'll see in your paperwork we have a number of appendices supporting the Cabinet report. You'll have the consultation document itself, the consultation report, which is a significant document outlining all the issues received during the consultation and the council's responses to those. We have the minutes of the meetings that we held with the school council, with the governors and the staff. We have updated impact assessment, so we have an integrated impact assessment, a community impact assessment, and an equality impact assessment. And then last but not least, when it gets to Cabinet, we'll have comments from this committee as well. So in terms of the case for change at Castle Corinion, you'll see from the documentation, low pupil numbers, so currently 23 and I believe 19 next September. High budget per pupil, 6,919 per pupil compared to the Powys average of 4,264. Also issues with the building, condition B according to the 2009 Welsh Government survey, but we updated the survey in 2020, and that indicated that the school had deteriorated to a condition C. Combined age classes is also a factor. It's a small school, and we have 2 classes with a number of year groups in each of those classes, and also issues around leadership, no permanent head from September 2021, but also in terms of leadership, significant teaching commitment from the current head teacher. Okay, so the main issues that you can see in your documents, main issues are comments about Castle Caerhenion Church in Wales School, comments about Church in Wales provision, impact on pupils, travel implications, impact on staff, impact on the community, comments about pupil numbers and surplus places, comments about small and rural schools, comments then about which of the schools pupils might transfer to, impact on protected characteristic groups, issues relating to finance, comments about the council's strategies, criticism of the council. Then we had questions and issues with the process, questions about the consultation documentation, alternative options were put forward. We had comments about the impact on the Welsh language, and then a comment in support of the proposal. Can I draw your attention to Estin's response, which is in the consultation report, and to summarise Estin's response, the proposal seems to include a balanced and proportionate range of options, 9 in total, which look in detail at a wide range of possibilities. And it is Estin's opinion that the proposal is likely to at least maintain the standard of education in the area. In terms of the presumption against closure of a rural school, as you know, the School Organisation Code 2017 included additional steps for councils and local authorities who are taking forward school reorganisation proposals. Therefore, we have complied with those steps. At the end of the consultation report, you will see that we have reassessed the options, again, taking account of any information received through the consultation. We've also looked at and considered alternative options, and the conclusion remains the same. So we confirm that the implementation of the proposal is the most appropriate response to the reasons identified in the proposal. In terms of the key issues, I believe, that can be drawn out from the consultation report, I think we would say that the educational justification for the proposal is a key one. Just asking why Castle Caerhenion can't deliver the new curriculum, learner entitlements and experience. Questions around why are bigger schools better. The second key issue, I think, are transport issues. There are a couple of issues around the transport regarding transport to church provision, because Castle Caerhenion is a Church in Wales school, and then transport to secondary provision because of the change of catchment areas, secondary catchment areas. And then again, last key issue, in our opinion, is the impact on the community. So we have included a community impact assessment, which indicates a significant impact on the community. Other issues being viability of the community centre, links to the local church, comments around being part of a village school, the community feel important for the development of pupils. Another issue about being part of the community, pupils can walk to school, aids their well-being. The socio-economic impact on the community of Castle Caerhenion should there be no school there, and also children unable to attend after school clubs if they're reliant on school transport. So those are the main themes that came through the consultation report. So I'm going to leave it there now and open up for questions.
Thank you, Marianne. Having looked through the reports and documents that are in front of us, what I've done is I've sent round to members an outline structure for today. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the documents in turn. We're going to look at the consultation document, Appendix A, with a view to exploring the question, has the review and analysis covered all viable options, and is the conclusion the best way forward? We're then going to work through each of the sections in turn on Appendix B in a methodical section by section way so that members are able to cover everything in an expedient fashion. Having looked at the reports from the meetings with school governors, staff and pupils, those comments seem to come through within the consultation report. So we're not going to look in any detail at that particular section, but then we're going to finish off with looking at the impact assessment and particularly the community impact assessment in respect of particularly the rural schools policy that you outlined. So that's how we're going to move forward for today. And I'm not seeing any hands yet, but does anyone want to open up on the consultation document section, whether there's any observations that you have there? I've got one that has been sent through to me by Graham Robson, but Councillor Lucy, if you'd like to start off.
Yes, thank you. It was just to pick up on one of the issues that was raised by through the in the consultation document, was the fact that some of the perhaps more elderly members of the community who didn't have access to the internet hadn't felt fully able to be involved in the consultation, and I wondered to what extent that was an issue.
Okay, I'll come back. We made sure that the consultation information was available via a number of means. So obviously we publish on the website. We have hard copies available on request, and we had a few requests for hard copies. We publicised the consultation in the County Times. We had posters up in Castle Caerenion pointing to where information could be gathered. So, you know, we also when we had the discussions with the school, making sure that the community knew about the consultation was part of that discussion as well. So you can see from the responses received, and if you see the breakdown of the responses, you can see there's some from parents, but there is also quite a significant amount from members of the community as well. So I think as well, for a school of this size, the amount of responses received is probably proportionate to what we would have expected to receive.
Thank you, Marianne.
Councillor Bryn.
Diolch yn iawn. Oeddwn ni just yn nodi y cost y pen ar mae'n costio i dysgu disgyblion yng Nghastell Caerenion dros 6,000 o bunnoedd. A ddylech chi sydd ddim yn syndod ar ysgol o'r maint hynny. Ond ydych chi'n nodi bod yr cost cyfartalog disgyblion cynradd yn Powys erbyn hyn yn 4,264. Tro dwytha weles i'r ffigwr yma'n cael ei drafod, oedd o'n tua 2,800, rhywbeth tebyg i hynny. Ydy'r ffigwr yna, pa mor gyfredol ydy'r ffigwr newydd? Ydy o'n ddiweddar iawn? Ydy o ganlyniad i'r holl grantiau ychwanegol sydd wedi dod i mewn i addysg drwy Llywodraeth Cymru'n ddiweddar, neu sut bod y ffigwr y cost y pen wedi codi cymaint ar gyfartaledd trwy Powys?
Lle bod Mari'n gallu dod mewn hefyd. Mae'r ffigwr 4,000 na yw'r ffigwr 2020-2021, y ffigwr 3,000, wel, so chi'n gynharach, y flwyddyn cynt oedd honno.
Oce, ond mae wedi codi'n sylweddol iawn, dydy e?
llai mewn. Do, mae wedi. Mae sawl rhan i hwnna. Rhywfaint i wneud gyda faint mae'r sir yn rhoi mewn, ond hefyd y grantiau bod ni wedi cael hefyd.
Dyna fo, ond os be o'n i'n meddwl ydy, os ydy'r ffigwr yna wedi cyfartalog wedi codi gymaint oherwydd o'r grantiau sy'n dod mewn, fydd y gwariant ar yr ysgolion bach yma wedi codi'n sylweddol hefyd, achos fysa nhw wedi derbyn o'r un grantiau fydden nhw?
Byddan, o ran grantiau, byddan nhw wedi cael, fel arfer mae hwnna'n symud gyda'r niferoedd o disgyblion, so bydda hwnna heb wneud y gwaniaeth rhwng yr arian am disgybl y pen yn ysgol hyn i gymharu â Powys cyfan.
Ie, oce, dyna hwnna'n ateb y cwestiwn, really. Mae hwnna'n esbonio pam bod y ffigwr ar gyfer ysgol bach fel hon yn gosach at y cyfartaledd nag buodd yn y gorffennol, achos llynedd oedd o bron yn 2 waith cyfartaledd, doedd ei, ond mae o'n, erbyn hyn, mae o'n 1.5 gwaith y cyfartaledd, mae'n lai, dydy.
Ie, mae rhan fwy... Sorry.
If you finish, Bryn, can I expand on that a little and say, is this a trend that you expect to see continue? That,
I've asked what I want to ask. If you want to expand, that's great. Yeah.
That the per pupil funding for the small schools would be nearer the average for Powys. Is that?
Yeah, you've seen in these figures a closing of the gap. Is this because of COVID and additional grants, or is this a trend that you would expect to see continue?
That's a really difficult one to answer because it depends on so many different factors as to what's built in.
It does go to the crux of this, one of the reasons for closing those, so it's a very important one.
Yes, absolutely. I think in terms of the funding per pupil, obviously through the vast majority of that funding is through the formula funding, and so it does depend on pupil numbers. So obviously, if a school's pupil numbers are reducing, then their budget per pupil will increase. But I think that the key point here is that there's a basic level of funding that schools need, and the formula funds provides that to function regardless of how many pupils are in there. And that's why the smaller schools cost more per head really than the larger schools. So.
Okay, let's move on. We've got a lot of ground.
Sorry.
I'm happy with that for now. I'm happy with that for now, Mary. Let's move on because we've got a lot of ground to cover. Angela, if you're on a poor connection, don't worry about bringing the screen up.
Thank you, Chair. So my question's also about funding. Under the preferred options, item 6 in Appendix A, one of the reasons given is the revenue saving to the council. So I just want to clarify, because we've been told often about how school service is having to spread its money too thinly across all its school stock. So any savings made from closing of a school, can you confirm where that money is going to go? Because originally we were led to believe that it would come back into school service, so there'd be more money available for other schools. But I believe that it says somewhere in a council document that the money would go back into the overall council corporate budget. And I know that the schools forum are very concerned about this. So sort of, are you able to clarify that?
Shall I start and then Mary do it in? Yes, the schools forum did pick it up, and it's really to do with how the council manages its overall budgets. So therefore, we're not ring fencing any savings from schools reorganisation for schools. However, in terms of the council's priorities, education spend is probably the most significant spend within the overall council budget. Therefore, when the council has to prioritise its funding, well, education, because of the size of it, it always gets a high priority. So I think that's sort of the crux of the answer there. Mary, I don't know whether you've got any more to add there.
Yeah, I think in terms of there's a process that the council has to go through every year to allocate the budget, and you know I don't think any sort of administration or even could commit future administrations to that ring fencing, and that wouldn't necessarily be desirable either. But there is an understanding that education is a really high priority for the authority. It's one of the highest, as Marianne said, really, it's one of the highest priorities for the authority, and that then means that if the budget should follow those priorities, and what we've seen is over recent years that approach has seen that additional investment in education. So our expectation is that would continue, but albeit it's not possible, I don't think, to actually ring fence it and sort of tie people in for future years.
Right, okay, that's very disappointing, but thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Councillor Amanda?
Thank you, Councillor Peake. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Don't worry about bringing the camera on if you've got
problems.
No,
it's fine. My question is to do with school transport. I think I'm right, Marianne, in that should a parent choose to send, if they want to send their child to another Church of Wales faith school, the next nearest school would be Welshpool, but that they wouldn't be entitled to free school transport yet. Is that right? Just before I ask my question.
That's correct.
Yeah. I just in doing my own research came across a recent judicial review, which was called R versus the City of Council of Swansea Council. I don't have the full facts of the case, but it was to do with transport to faith schools. And my understanding is that a local authority has changed its school transport policy based on that case, particularly on the issue of transport to faith schools, where they weren't able to, under their previous policy, get transport to free transport to their nearest faith school. So I'm just wondering whether the council is aware of that case and whether it's taken it into consideration here. I can send you the specifics in the chat if that's of use.
Yes, please, if you could. Yes, we are aware. We've had legal advice about this as well. I think the issue here is in terms of the code, the school organisation code, local authorities, if you're removing a church provision, you have to make sure that there's there's some church provision available within the locality. Here, yes, there is. There's enough places in Welshpool Church in Wales School, which is probably 4.5 miles away from Castle Cerinion. You are right as well. Our home to school transport policy states clearly that we don't provide transport to denominational schools. I think the issue here is whether the parents and families in the Castle Cerinion have chosen Castle Cerinion because it's a church school or because it's a local school.
Yeah,
and we won't know. Yeah, and we won't know until, should the proposal go forward to close the school, we won't know until parents make the decisions which school they want to choose for the children. So at this stage, we're sticking with the council's transport policy, which is not to provide transport to denominational schools. However, having said that, there is an appeals process linked to the transport process, to the transport policy. So there is that option available should transport be refused at any time.
And hopefully through this process, it will be made to be clear to parents that they will, through that process, be able to put their case forward should they feel very strongly that they want to choose a faith school. You know, my concern here is that there may, and I presume we were probably talking about a small number of parents, but I don't want affordability to come into, to take, you know, a parent might decide, I can't afford to go to send my child to Welshpool Church of Wales school because I can't afford it, but that would have been my first choice based on my faith, and I wouldn't want them to not be able to put that case forward to the council. And so you're saying that they would be able to?
It would be, if anybody's refused transport, the appeal process is open to them on whatever basis. Yeah, it is an issue that's been raised by the diocese as well, so we are aware of this. So, but at the moment, we are saying we have a transport policy that does not provide to faith schools.
Okay, talking about Marianne. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that. I've got Jake and Margaret's hands up. We're going to be coming back to the issue of transport affordability when we come on to the looking at the consultation report. So I'm going to introduce something that Graham sent through to us as part of his apology. And then if you've got a different point, if you leave your hand up, I'll come back to you. I'm just going to read out what Graham said, and it's quite simple. It said, the only comment I really have is that once again, we're looking at an individual school. 2 years ago, we were informed by officers that the plan was they would be reviewing the whole of Powys education provision with a view to presenting a single plan that would have covered all schools and put us on a roadmap for the next decade or two. It's sad that this ambition has been dropped and we're back to multiple single school reviews with the local bun fights that entails rather than a single coherent plan everyone could get behind. That's his comment, not mine, but I would add to that. When this vision was being outlined in the pavilion in Llandrindod, we had officers and head from Dolgelley School, a multi-site all-through school, which mirrors in many ways the catchments of a lot of our existing schools. In inviting that person there, it gave the message that that was the vision that we were looking to move forward. Yet that vision is not in any of the options for this school. There's no suggestion that it might become part of a wider school within the area. And it's concerning that that isn't showing as one of the options, and therefore there is no evidence as to why that's been discounted. Would anyone care to explain to all of us why the change in apparent direction?
I can come in there. Don't know if anybody else wants to come in. It's not a change in direction. The strategy that was approved last year states clearly that the strategic aim 1 is to improve learner entitlement. Within that, then, it's got 2 objectives. One is to establish a network of all age schools, and the second objective is to rationalise and reconfigure primary provision. So that allows us to look at both things together. Within the county, we have taken different approaches in different areas for different reasons. For example, we've carried out an area review up in the Llanfyllin area. We've carried out an area review in Brecon. However, we're taking different. We're looking at individual schools for different reasons elsewhere. The reason why we haven't carried out an area review here Castle would actually be in the Llanfyllin catchment, is because there are a number of different things going on in the Llanfyllin catchment currently. Obviously, establishing the all-through school is happening in Llanfyr. we've just opened, following the merger of Llanerfil and Dyffryn Banw, Ysgol Cwm Banwy, which only opened last September. The catchment of Llanfer is also very complex in terms of the different type of schools it has. So there are Welsh medium schools, Llanfer itself is dual stream, English medium schools, church schools. So it's not a catchment. There are a number of things that need to happen in a phased way. So once we've established the all through in Llanfer Cerenion, there's the language component to think about there as well. Those things probably need to happen first before there's a further catchment review in the Llanfer Cerenion catchment. I hope that explains it. Also, in terms of area reviews, sometimes when you carry out area reviews, the outcome of area reviews can take a long time to be implemented. However, we are faced with a number of small schools in the county, and for equity purposes and fairness, we need to address those as well. So we're taking a two-pronged approach, is what I'm probably saying.
Okay, I'm going to leave that now, but when we've had other discussions through, then we may wish to revisit that. Does anyone else have any questions around Appendix A? Jake.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Marion, for that response there. Are there any particular lessons that we've learned throughout this consultation exercise that we'd want to perhaps take across into more complex exercises? I mean, although I note what Graham, as Pete read out from Graham there about coherency, Estin have supported the fact that most of the options here were properly identified. But in terms of those lessons, I'm thinking ahead, and I'll sort of put my cards on the table a little bit about the Ysgol Calon Cymru changes, and so far we've been notified of the broad plan. My concern is about how we might put together an appropriate consultation, which will, in a timely way, reach out to heads of the schools in the feeder system, as it were, for Ysgol Calon Cymru, and perhaps include youth at the high school, children at the smaller schools, etc. there. So how we might reshape or properly shape that consultation, having learned from exercises like this. So not necessarily put you on the spot now, but if you have got any lessons learned without undermining your position, then I'd be very pleased to hear them and know that as Scrutiny we might be able to discuss those further in the future. Thanks.
Okay, happy to be put on the spot anyway.
Marianne, by all means,
go on.
Marianne, by all means answer, but I was looking at the programme that we had, and I was going to suggest that when we complete this first tranche, so the 4 that are out, plus the language schools that we've done, that we might look to have an Officer Scrutiny meeting towards the back end of September, probably back end of October, November, to actually review the processes and look at what can be learned. So by all means, answer the question, but perhaps bear that in mind.
I was going to probably say the same thing. Lessons learned, yes, we need to do a lessons learned. We have been on quite a journey, haven't we, since the strategy was approved. And yes, some things could be done differently, and as always, as with everything, I think I'd be keen to explore further how best to take forward the Ysgol Calon Cymru approach, which is the informal engagement exercise on a very complex plan before formulating proposals for formal consultation. But I think that's something that we can discuss further. But happy to have that discussion as well. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I've got no further hands at this point, so I'm going to turn our attention now to Appendix B, which is the consultation report and the feedback. And I'm going to work our way through this as it comes up. And I know members have had sight of this for some time. The first thing I'm going to raise is in respect to the Estin report section, but do any members of the committee have anything before we get to the point that I highlighted in the email to you all on page 21? Okay, in which case I'm going to move straight to the Estin report, and it's broadly supportive, but it does ask a question and present a challenge right at the end. And that is around access for pupils from low income and economically deprived backgrounds. And I just read it out. In mitigation, the proposal does set out that there would be free travel to and from school for pupils in accordance with the local authority policy. However, the proposal does not identify how the authority will deal with wider issues. I think this is specifically referring to extracurricular activity and the fact and the burden that would place on parents, some of whom, and I need to correct you because it is something that crops up later in the report. There are two figures in the report for the distance, particularly to Welshpool. One says it's about 7 miles. The other suggests it's 4. Looking on Google Maps, the recommended route is 6.5 miles. So there is actually a factual issue within a couple of statements.
Okay. Right. Can I come in there?
How do you plan to deal with this issue that has been raised?
Yeah, it's been raised a lot, and we did acknowledge this when we published the consultation documents, the original consultation documents. Anyway, this is one that comes up quite often when there are proposals to close schools, particularly around rural schools, and it's around pupils having to rely on homeschool transport where they previously didn't have to rely on homeschool transport, and then having maybe that then constraining their ability to take part in events, activities after school, and potentially difficulties for parents then to attend schools. I don't think there's an easy answer for the council here, because I think the answer probably lies with the schools themselves. So if you look at the schools, the alternative schools for Castle Caerenion, apart from, say, Welshpool, most of the other schools that they may transfer to are rural schools anyway. They are in rural communities. I would class Llanfair Caerenion as a rural community. And my response to it would be that I would think that those schools are probably very experienced in providing a range of extracurricular activities for all pupils, including those on homeschool transport. I would think, that there would be opportunities within the school day for activities, and I think the answer lies with the schools themselves. And because we're a rural county, we have lots of children reliant on homeschool transport. So this is an issue that affects all pupils. Lynette.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in. You'll only be too well aware that we are at the stage of, for next year, particularly in primary, we had an announcement this week that the new curriculum will be continuing and starting in next September 2022, delayed for years 7 upwards. But in terms of that, the curriculum, be it extracurricular or be it the curriculum itself, there will be some significant changes. It'll be a curriculum that's pupil-led, all schools designing their own curriculum to suit their learners based on the 4 purposes and the 6 AOLEs, areas of learning and experience. So in terms of extracurricular, the curriculum needs to be innovative and creative. Teachers with pupils select the content, no prescription. Schools to decide on specific experiences, choosing topics, which will include extracurricular work. their you know, the music, the games. I know you asked the question in relation to transport, but many of these extracurricular activities take place during the school day, as Marianne has just said. They need to have the learning experiences that challenge the pupil in new circumstances. So we are having the new curriculum from 2022. Primary schools, maintained nursery and non-maintained nursery settings will roll out the new curriculum for September 22. And as I say, earlier this week, the minister announced that it will be year 7 for secondary school. So at this point there, I think that's all that I need to say about the curriculum. I hope it will come up a little later in the scrutiny, Councillor Pete, or do you want me to just carry on about the curriculum? It will. Yeah, okay, so I'll leave that one there at this point.
It will come up. Okay, does anyone have any response to that? My only observation in response, Marianne, there were a lot of I thinks and I expects there. Given the level of feedback in the report, I would have expected a little bit more certainty to come from you, that you'd clarified with the schools that you're looking for these pupils to be going to, that they have options during the school time and that they have ways of dealing this with their existing pupils that would allay the concerns of the parents at Corinium. And you could have allayed those within the actual report, and that's something I hope you'll take away for the other proposals that are due to come before us in the autumn.
Okay, I'll take your point there. Our information comes from the challenge advisors who work closely with the schools anyway. So the information about the schools, we are aware that they can deliver extracurricular activities.
I think my point is that the council's responses should be seeking to reassure parents and pupils that have obvious concerns. And I think you could have gone further and been more definitive in that than you have. It's an observation in a friendly manner, shall we say.
Take your point. Okay. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any comments, and would anyone else like to come in rather than me going through the things I identified, taking a lead on the next section around it, which is actually what Lynette was talking about, which is the new curriculum. So in which case, we're going to move on to section 1.1, and I'm looking particularly at comment 1.16, sorry, 1.1116, where it says we have large classrooms, we have lots of space to move around, and we do lots of teamwork. We're excited about the new curriculum and think our school is going to be a great place to learn in this fun new learning style with the 4 purposes. So it's quite clear that from that, I'm assuming pupils' comment, the school are already moving towards the new curriculum and are teaching in that manner. But in the officers' feedback and the officers' comments, there's quite clear concern that the school is not going to be able to deliver the new curriculum because of its size. These two things kind of don't sit together, and welcome some clarity on that, particularly bearing in mind that the new curriculum encourages pupils to stretch to their ability rather than to their age. And it could be argued that the 2 classes based on the foundation and the stage with the multi-ages will actually enable pupils to expand beyond what they might otherwise be constrained to by a year group.
Hello, Councillor Pete. Is it all right if I start?
I don't mind who comes in. As always, whichever officer's best placed, jump in and others follow on.
Thank you. Yeah, it is about the difficulty in implementing the new curriculum, I think, is our response to that. All schools are on a continuum to implement the curriculum. However, no school can actually say they have implemented it. We're still waiting to find out some of the final details around some of the assessment areas. So yes, we can say that all schools are moving towards this. However, it needs to be acknowledged that in small schools with fewer qualified teachers, it is going to be difficult for them to design the curriculum. It's the expertise that the teachers will have, obviously trying to have the 6 areas of learning which they're trying to deliver. You need to have that expertise across your teaching staff. Now, in a larger school, obviously you will have more staff, so therefore a greater expertise, and hopefully in specific areas as well, because each of the areas of learning is combining some of the subjects that are obviously in the curriculum at the moment. So we need to ensure that we've got staff that are qualified, have subject specific or disciplinary specific expertise in order to get that progression taking place across the whole of the school. Now, it's not that it can't be done in smaller schools, it is just the difficulty that they have having all the 4 age groups in one class to actually ensure that that is in place across all areas of learning with that subject specific knowledge as well. It's important to note that it's effective teaching that makes the difference to improve our learner outcomes. If you have a very highly skilled, effective teacher, they are able to teach those pupils. It is not necessarily the smaller school size or a smaller class size that makes that difference. In smaller schools, you will have pupils that could have the same teacher for up to 4 years. And if there are gaps in some of the expertise that some of those teachers would have, then that can have an impact on those pupils because they would have that same person teaching them for 4 years. So teachers in the small schools will need to plan over those 4 age ranges, and it's not just the 4 age ranges, as you mentioned earlier, it's about the mixed areas of expertise, and it's about ensuring those pupils have pupil-led learning. So it's not just about 4 age ranges, it is actually about the ability of those pupils, which can actually stretch for even wider than that. So it's not just about 4-year groups, it is about ability ranges. Now, you're having 4 age ranges in one class. That is very difficult for teachers to do. And it's not saying it can't be done. What we're saying is it is more difficult in those areas there. And it puts additional pressure on teachers while they're trying to create a new curriculum. They also have to understand about learner progression. You know, we're still learning about what the expectations are as part of the new curriculum around expectations and progression steps and that pace of learning. Now, for staff, they need to be able to work together to ensure they understand this through professional learning. And that professional dialogue obviously will be greater in schools with more teachers. You know, if there are only 2 teachers inside a school, it is more difficult to have those professional discussions and to ensure that we're catering for the wider age range, ability range, sorry, for the pupils. So in larger schools, practitioners can share and learn from each other in a way that possibly in a 2-teacher school, it would be more challenging to do that. Also, we mentioned just now about additional activities and extracurricular activities. You know, there are opportunities, obviously, with larger staff that they have more skilled practitioners in certain areas, such as music or in sport. So these are things that are challenges within smaller schools. I think it's so important to acknowledge those things.
Thank you, Eric. Margaret, you're looking to come in.
Sorry, yes. I accept what Eirik is saying, but we have a lot of small schools in Powys who are already along the road of developing the new curriculum, and Castle Corinium being one of them. And reading the paperwork and knowing the school, they have come quite a long way along that road to mitigate the issues related to small schools as far as they can under the current circumstances that we've been living under. So I just wonder, how are we with our small schools, the authority it must be monitoring very closely how small schools are actually being able to implement this new curriculum so that we can learn from each other. Because before Castle goes, if it is to go, whatever the decision is, they have come a long way along that route, and that what they have actually developed, I think, should be shared as well to support other schools who maybe aren't as far along that path.
If I can come in there, Chair, it's Delith.
By all means, Delith.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. Yes, I get what you're saying with monitoring, and we have got a key document published by Estyn and Welsh Government called The Journey to 2022, which set out each step and the expectations for schools. And like Eirik said, they're all on that continuum of working and preparing for the implementation in 2022. But coming back to some of the points that Eirik has made regarding how the importance of planning and delivering the curriculum, and it's all about the teachers and leaders here designing the curriculum. I think this is the first chance, the opportunity for teachers in Wales. It's a huge responsibility to design that curriculum, and having effectiveness, collaboration, etc. is key. But also, like Eirik said, in a mixed age class, especially with 4 age ranges as well, that provides a challenge for teachers, an ongoing challenge that needs to be sustained, where they must constantly adapt their approach, and they need, I think, a high level of flexibility and organisation in their lesson planning to ensure that teaching caters for both age groups and abilities. We've mentioned progression here. And I guess sustaining that and developing that is an additional workload for teachers in small schools, given that they have additional roles and responsibility regarding leadership, etc. So I think that's a valid point there. There's also collaboration, I think, is key. Eirik mentioned it with teachers, the professional dialogue. And that's a challenge as well in small schools, where professional learning, there's a wealth of opportunities out there, but that can also impact on the level or the standard of the provision and the outcomes for pupils when you haven't got maybe as much flexibility or as much collaboration with professional dialogue for the workforce. And I guess it's back to what I should say is equity for our teaching profession, for the learners, but also equality and fairness across the profession when you're faced with a lot of workload issues around the planning. I can also, I'd also like to make the point that, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
No, carry on.
Okay.
Carry on, Dennis. I thought you'd paused for.
No, sorry, did Margaret want to come in there? Oh, okay, I'll carry on. Sorry, I wasn't sure whether I could see her hand up. Okay. Also, in larger schools, like we've said, there is more opportunity for career progression for staff and leadership pathways for all staff. And again, we know that effective leadership, effective teaching, effective pedagogy, team building is at the heart of successful schools. So there would be more opportunities probably for career progression. And again, we want to reiterate that planning is related to what I've just said. Planning and designing the curriculum in schools is a teacher responsibility, a very important one. Again, listening to the pupil-led, but it's not the responsibility of the support staff. And I also would like to stress with what you're saying about the pedagogical principles that are key factor of the new curriculum, where we've got 12, and we've also got some early progression steps that prioritise high quality learning environment. So what we want is opportunities to move freely between the continuous, enhanced and focused activities, the focused provision that we've had in the foundation phase for years, but we want to build on that so that they're using and having this provision both indoors and outdoors. And again, I guess safeguarding the quality of the provision, developing independent learning, developing our learners to be critical and problem thinkers, you know, so that they really are ambitious and creative. And this again can pose some challenges for small schools because the independency is a key factor of effective pedagogy. And coming back to collaboration, again, I'm referencing the 12 pedagogical principles, and to encourage collaboration is key. Research, I think it's EEF, if I'm right, research that shows that the impact of collaborative approaches on learning is positive, it's consistently positive. And I guess low pupil numbers can impact on effective collaboration because it shows that approaches that promote talk and interaction between learners tend to result in the best results. So when we say that, face-to-face talking, face-to-face problem solving, giving them a rich, authentic context so they can solve the problems. I think there is some collaboration, or some evidence too, that collaboration can be supported with competition between groups. But again, that might pose problems if there are lower pupil numbers. And I think this is my next point that I really want to make is we've all heard and probably understood self-assessment and peer assessment, but there is a strong emphasis in the new curriculum, and I'm excited by this, about peer tutoring. And what we mean there is peer tutoring to support or enhance normal teaching. We don't mean to replace it, but again, research has it that pupils learn more when they teach others and teach their peers. And again, peer tutoring is effective, and for that to happen, you sometimes need higher pupil numbers and a range of abilities in the class. So peer tutoring is effective to consolidate the learning. And again, interventions, we've talked about EFSM pupils, the lower ability, and again, related to research, we have talked about the additional grants. We've had the accelerated learning plan, we have our PDG grants, etc. in schools these days. And when interventions are delivered by teachers, and I mean by teachers, not always support staff day in, day out, it is likely to have the highest impact. And maybe more capacity would be available in a larger school for a leader to provide this high level tutoring, one-to-one, small groups by teachers. I don't know if anybody wants to...
That's covered quite a large area, and it's quite clear that whilst we've been focused on COVID, there's been a lot of movement forward on the new curriculum. We may need a briefing as a committee to actually get back up to speed on the focus of that, because you're giving us a lot of food for thought there. Margaret, I know you're keen to come back, and then I'll take Graham.
Question. It's been, to listen to this has been really helpful, and from it we discover the advantages of a larger school. Now, what size school are we talking about that can deliver the benefits of the new curriculum, because we've had them outlined so clearly?
I'm happy to come in there, Councillor Chair.
Lynette.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. Yeah, I mean, as we've said earlier, the the new curriculum has got 6 areas of learning and experience, and our schools are on the journey to implement that. All schools will have the statutory duty to deliver that in September 2022. When you're asking what sort of size, looking at the workload which we've just discussed, you really would need a lead person for each of those 6 areas of learning and experience to design the curriculum in a school. So ideally, you'd want the size of a school where you could have enough people to lead one area. It's substantial, the amount of work in one of those areas of learning and experience. Just to say, the curriculum we currently have, the national curriculum, came in 1988. I do just about predate that and started my teaching career just before that. But, that was more of a content driven, what you had to teach was there. In the new curriculum, it's about designing the curriculum in your school. And so the work that's needed around each of those areas of learning and experience would need significant amount of planning, which we've already talked about, and leading those areas within a school really to support the other teachers within that school who may not have expertise in that area, but actually can be supported to deliver that area of learning and experience within their classroom. So hopefully that gives you sort of an overview of how, seeing the size of schools that would be ideal is somebody leading on those 6 areas of learning and experience. Also, we've got the ALN Act now in September 2021, where the leadership role of the LNCO as part of the national reforms. It needs a significant leadership role there, with all of the schools having to, so it's all related to the new curriculum, and the ALN Act is all related, but there would be, we would need a significant leadership role there for the work that the schools need to do going forward with that as well. So hopefully that's answered you, Margaret.
There's some specific practical questions around ALN that we'll touch on in a bit. I've got 2 hands up at the moment. Councillor Bryn, you've been waiting for quite a while, and then Councillor Sandra.
Iawn, diolch yn iawn. Da ni wedi clywed lawer iawn o synwyr yn y cyfraniadau diweddar gan Eirig a Delyth a Lynette, cytuno yn gryf efo pob peth ych chi dweud. Mae'r dadleuon hyn wrth gwrs yn hollol berthnasol pan mae'n dod i ysgolion dwy ffrwd sy'n mynd i cael ei trafod yn y dyfodol agos. A dwi'n gobeithio'n arw fyddwch chi'n gallu rhoi'r dadleuon o'r un mor gryf ar gyfer symud yr ysgolion sydd ar hyn o bryd yn ddwy ffrwd ymlaen i ysgolion, i symud nhw ymlaen ar hyd y cwricwlwm continwwm iaith. Ac a fyswch chi'n cytuno mae'r unig le ar gyfer ysgolion dwy ffrwd yn y dyfodol agos ydy ble mae ffrwd dwyieithog newydd yn cael ei greu, a bod yn hen bryd i'r ysgolion dwy ffrwd sydd gyda ni ar hyn o bryd fod wedi symud ymlaen ar hyd y cwricwlwm continwwm iaith ers peth amser. So chi'n cytuno hynny?
Thanks, Bryn. I think that stands alone in respect of what we're looking at today, because we are looking at an English Church in Wales school. I don't know if any officers want to come back on that. But... Okay, in this case, I'll move on to Councillor Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have to declare an interest here, but because as far as this school is concerned, but I do have empathy with parents, children, and communities of where mention is of closing schools. I've first-hand experience of this, and I fought and campaigned hard to maintain the 12 existing schools in the Ystrad area at one time, and we succeeded. I don't know if that was to our detriment at that time, but things do progress and move on, etc. And as you know, we were the first to go through the 21st century schools in the Estragonais area, when each and every one of the primary schools in our area, the 12 of them, did close. One of them went by default. It was a very small school. Parents were up in arms. I attended a public meeting with the minister at that time, and the hall was packed. People were angry and agitated, and the things that they were saying was, "You'll close this school over my dead body," etc., etc. So it was really angry. But the very next day, those parents went to 2 different areas. Some to areas in Powys, others to areas in Neath Talbot, the neighbouring authority, and asked, "Is there room in the school for my child?" And they went one by one, and that school closed within a very short space of time. The parents did it themselves. So I do have empathy with individuals, as I said. But coming back to where we are now, we have got 4 big primary schools in our area. And we can remember very vividly the small schools that we once had. But I can compare and contrast between the 2, and I see enormous improvements in a big school. I remember having a whole school on the stage to do pantomimes, etc., during the Christmas period, from the very tiny tots to the very, to the older children. Because the school was so small, every child had a part, no matter how small or how big. And that was great for a small school. But as we progress and we have a bigger school, I know COVID has changed a lot of things, and things are not the same now. But I do remember having relays of school concerts where parents have had to go in 2 sessions at a time, because we've had to accommodate for parents who are working and parents and some grandparents wanting to come. And it seemed as if the school was open 24/7 for parents to come in to see their youngsters on the stage. And each child was, really receptive of that and gained a lot. And as far as their education is concerned, learning from each other in the class, there are loads and loads of different reasons why a big school works, and I can talk from experience from the both. And I can assure you that as far as the children in the area in Estragonais are concerned, there have been real big improvements and lots of advantages in youngsters having the ability to learn with their peers, alongside their peers in bigger classrooms, and learn with each other, from each other, as well as their teachers. And I can understand and appreciate one member of staff taking one area to become, learn on that experience, learn as the children progress as well, and then becoming the lead in a topic, rather than taking one subject through the whole school, the way it's been in the past. So I can only say from experience, big schools do work. But as each of us are sitting here in Scrutiny, I'm asking each of us to reflect how fair and equal it is when we consider we're all aware of school budgets, and when we look that there is £3,127 per head, per child in a school. And then you've got another school with £7,877 per head in a school for that child. And those are only averages. So there are some schools with less and some schools with more. How can we, as responsible adults, accept that is right and proper? Surely monies should be shared throughout all the schools in Powys, irrespective, so each and every child has a similar amount of monies, not those great differences between the amount that is spent on each child. Each of them deserve the same, or as near to the same as possible. I bear in mind that there are difficulties in closing small schools. I've been through it, I've experienced it. But I think we really have to look long and hard. Powys is a huge authority. We need parity for our youngsters, parity for the staff as well. So I'll just leave that there. And I'm just saying the last thing I want to say is, let us consider the child and let us try and make it as equal as possible for each and every child. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sandra. I'm not seeing any more hands at the moment, so I'm going to move us on into section 1.3. I've got a specific question on 1.3.16. Sorry, 1.3. Does anyone have any other questions on this particular section? Not seeing any hands. My question here is that the observation is, I have my breakfast here too. And the response is, many schools offer the opportunities for pupils to attend breakfast clubs. Now, all of these pupils are going to be reliant on home to school transport. Can we have a reassurance that whichever school they choose, there will be a breakfast club offering here? Because I note that there are a number of pupils from economically disadvantaged backgrounds within the school where having breakfast club available to them might be quite a significant part of their daily nutrition. I think Lynette, you're coming in.
Yeah, happy to come in there. Yeah, I think all of the schools there are able to offer breakfast provision for the pupils in that area. So you've mentioned transport, but even if they get in at transport and they haven't had breakfast, the schools provide them with that breakfast.
Thank you for that.
Particularly if they are eligible for free school meals.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on the comments coming from the staff? That's section 1.4. And from 1.5, comments from the leadership. Okay, we're now coming on to 1.6, which is around the school building. I'm going to open up this discussion again. The council response to the statement, the building is not modern, but it has good facilities, is that there was another condition survey undertaken. It's been referenced a number of times, but that's not part of the pack here, so it cannot be evaluated as part of the report. As this is a special survey rather than one undertaken as part of the Welsh Government condition surveys, I would have expected to see that as part of the documentation, since the council are relying on that as part of the reasons for closure.
Can I come in there?
Yeah.
Okay. The reason we haven't included that grading of the latest condition survey is because the other schools haven't had an updated condition survey. So you're not comparing like with like. So if the other schools are based on 2009 information, then it would be unfair to sort of compare a 2020 survey with the 2009. But we put it in there just for information, just to say that we have had that updated condition survey.
As part of your justification for closure, you're saying that the school has deteriorated. So you are comparing it, but you're not comparing it with other schools because they may have deteriorated as well, or they may have deteriorated further. So we don't have that comparison.
We don't have that information for comparison.
I'm just trying to explore the implications of that because it's a major element that there is school repairs need doing. That's part of your reason for closure. But the school on the latest common survey is grade B. So I'm just trying to understand it. It's something just jars with me that there's something not quite right there.
It's purely down to fairness and comparing. Because we haven't got the updated condition assessments for all the other schools, then obviously we stick with the 2009 condition grading for Castle, but we just make reference to the fact that we've got an updated condition assessment. That makes sense?
It makes sense, but you're referring that there's that within the reasoning that the decline is part of the reason for closure, that there are additional works there.
It's within the case for change for Castle, but obviously it is. We've made it.
It's also within. It's also. Sorry, I'm being a bit inquisitorial here, but it's also within your responses to comments. And if the responses are there, I would expect to see the report that those responses are based on, so that the responses you're giving can be viewed in the round. Something to think about. It's not a showstopper to me, but it's something to think about, that if you are putting information forward from a report as part of a response, having access to that report within the pack would be more perhaps appropriate.
Okay, take your point.
Chair,
I'm happy to move on from that. But yeah, Councillor Phil, you wanted to come in briefly.
Yeah, thank you. I think you just got to take it in this case, isn't it? In when we're talking about Castle here, the school obviously will have deteriorated. And what we're saying is if we were to retain this as a school within the estate, it would need significant investment to bring it up to a standard. So I don't think we're talking about, I do appreciate where you're coming from, but again, that's a huge amount of work and cost and resource that maybe we don't need to invest into this specific example. And whilst I've got the mic, I just need to thank Councillor Sandra for her comments, because I think there was a lot of key points that she made that really do hit home about this whole transformation agenda. And it really is heartening to hear, how Councillor Sandra saw it from before transformation and how she sees it now. And I think that's what we've all got to remember is at the forefront of this, and is that learner experience. And what we want to be talking about is how we can get all of our learners into them experiences, rather than talking about retaining them in maybe the current experiences, that in such an emotive topic that everybody's always going to want to retain their local school. Change has to happen. So just like to thank Councillor Sandra. It was very positive. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Phil. I'm going to move on. It's in the same area. There's talk about modifications at this school to improve disability access, and some quite specific requirements of one particular pupil. Are you confident that all of the other schools that pupil may be wishing to attend have got the same facilities as are at Corinium, or are there limitations? And are you confident that the other schools in the area have actually got the same level of support for people with physical or ALM related disabilities?
In terms of this particular pupil, it depends. Should the school close, then we would obviously need to liaise with the parents and the school to understand exactly what the specific needs are. Then we would need to consider which school they would choose to attend, and then we would see what adaptations would be required, because I don't particularly know the actual specifics around this particular case here. But as an authority, I would just say that the authority has a duty to make sure that all its school buildings are DDA compliant. Welsh World Church in Wales School has excellent facilities in this area, but we would obviously need to ensure that whichever school for whichever child which has additional needs or disabilities, that the council would need to make sure that the facilities were there.
I think that's reassuring to me, because you're saying that the parental choice will lead, not the availability of facilities. If the facilities aren't at the school of parental choice, the council will have to undertake what's necessary assuming it is obviously practical. Thank you. That's the assurance I was looking for on that one. What I'm doing here is exploring around the equitability of provision elements of the change to ensure that there will be no detriment for any pupil or groups of pupils by this closure. Does anyone else have any questions around the building before we move on to the area that I think Margaret wants to lead on, which is section 2.1, which is dealing with the faith element, and in particular how parents wishing to pursue a faith-based option will be treated in this respect. So, Margaret, I'm going to pass across to you. I know you talked about this as your main concern.
Yes, it's been dealt with prior to this because Amanda came in with some information, but it is a concern that those parents who would want, well, in the school organisational code, there's reference to language and there's a presumption and that faith schools as well. And it is a concern that low-income families who actually did want that provision won't have the opportunity to access that provision purely on income. And that is, I think, when we're looking at the issues related to low income, this is a real factor with transport. It's raising its head here as a faith school issue, but there is a real issue there with low income families when we are looking at change.
Okay, I'll come in. Lynette, I'm not sure if you've got more to add. Just to say, I won't go over the transport answer that I gave earlier, but we do recognise it as an issue here. In terms of the curriculum offer, Lynette, do you want to come in here in terms of the religious aspects?
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Yeah, well, Margaret will know only too well that obviously in church schools there is, at present, there is a fourth core subject, which is religious education. And again, we're under a curriculum review there's currently a consultation out regarding religious education and values education in the new curriculum. So that's currently live consultation on all of that at the moment. We do recognise that, for a church school, there is that element of religious education which is enhanced other than in other schools. We recognise that. What will be interesting, I think, for us, as if this proposal continues, is to see how many of the parents in that area choose the school because of the religious element and the faith school status that it has, or just because it's their local school. That will be and it's something that Estin ask in their inspections of how many parents have chosen it because it is a faith school. And I'm sure for the Section 57 inspections, they asked that as well. So that's, so we do know it's different. And we know that consultation is out around the religious education elements. So we do recognise that, and it is something to consider, but it will be interesting to see how many parents choose it because it's a faith school.
And at that point, can I ask, when we've talked earlier in the meeting that there is a right of appeal about transport, now would that be explained to parents right at the onset, all parents, that there is a right of appeal
Yes, that can be explained to them. Once a decision is made here, then we could be having those discussions with parents should the proposal be to close, obviously.
I think there's a significant overarching issue here in that during the reorganisation, we are going to have other situations where a Church in Wales school will be closed and the nearest school is a secular school, county primary, and this could have an ongoing impact across a number of these decisions, and it could be looked at very differently with very different eyes. It could be looked at as uncharitably, and I'm not suggesting it is, it could be looked at as an attack on Church in Wales schools. Equally, it could be looked at positively as consolidating Church in Wales schools and ensuring that they have a viable future. And I think the difference between the two is the transport policy. And it may well be that one of the recommendations coming out of this is that in the next review of the transport policy that we actually look at the issues around faith-based education in the same way perhaps as we look about Welsh language education. I don't think it's something we can resolve today, but I would highlight it as a risk through the ongoing process. My other question around the faith-based side of things is around the very strong message that there is a very strong faith-based ethos that is enhancing to the wider community. It's clear from the comments, both from pupils and the church, that there are very, very close links between the local school and the local church, almost to the extent that you could say that the church is an extra teacher and an extra classroom, which doesn't always come through. I have to raise a concern at this point about the impact on the community side of things that would come about by breaking the depth of this link, and ask very seriously whether these proposals actually meet the community issues and requirement that the proposal is not providing significant detriment to the community. You may want to think about that, and we'll talk about it again when we come to the community impact assessment. Okay, does anyone else have any comments on 2.1? The next section I'm looking at is right the way through in section 4. So in your reading, has anyone got anything in sections 2 and 3? Lucy, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. It was just that the sections that are really on the children's welfare relating to COVID and walking to school and all those kind of issues. And one of the things that I may have missed, but there seemed to be conflicting information about how many children are actually able to walk to school. And also as part of that, we don't seem to have the information about how many people actually access the school from within the catchment and whether there are people coming from outside the catchment. And the same information vice versa. Are there children from within the Castle Crinion catchment who are accessing education elsewhere?
Thanks for that, Liz. That was going to be one of my later questions. We've in the community impact assessment, we've got where are the pupils coming from, but we haven't got the converse information about where the pupils within the Crinion catchment are actually going to.
Okay.
So there's a number of questions from Lucy, but just highlight that one.
In terms of yes, the information about where the pupils are coming from, it's in the community impact assessment. We do have the information about where all the pupils are travelling to, but I think it's in a previous document. It's one of the option appraisals. But if you bear with me, I can either get it now or I can present it at Cabinet on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. But the other part of that was about the children walking to school.
Okay.
And I know within the responses to the consultation, there are a number of people who comment on the fact that children are walking to school, but the numbers seem to be quite varied. There's obviously somebody's being inaccurate about the numbers that actually walk to school.
Yes, with that one, I think 75% of pupils attending Castle, it's their closest school. in terms of the detail of how many are walking, I would have to find that for cabinet on Tuesday, if that's an issue that you want to raise.
Well, it's just something that's obviously been raised in the report as,
yes,
the additional environmental impact from people having to drive when they would have otherwise walked, and health impact on the children. And maybe it's an issue, maybe it isn't. We've no idea of the extent of the issue. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lucy. Does anyone else have anything? The next thing I picked up on was at 4.5.5. And this is around clusters and going to which schools you're going to, and availability of space. There's at least 20 pupils going somewhere. We don't know where they're going, but if they all went to Berriew, there wouldn't be enough space. Further on in the document, it highlights that there's 40 houses being built within the catchment, using the council's own figures of 0.45 pupils per house. That suggests there's somewhere between 17 and 22, 24 pupils across all age ranges. So let's assume they're uniformly distributed. That's another somewhere between 8 and 10 pupils of primary age going to be in that area. And I don't know what the figure for growth is around Berriew, but I do remember lots of planning applications coming in the Berriew area. So how confident are you that Berriew will be able to take all of these pupils without needing to put additional classrooms in? And putting this all together, those figures for new pupils coming into the area don't appear to be coming through in the tables in the community impact assessment, where it's showing the number of pupils as actually declining. So again, I'd ask the question as to why we are not seeing figures relating to the new build being incorporated into the SMART.
Shall I take your questions in chunks, if that's okay? So
yes,
first, yeah. In terms of the capacity, so we know the capacity of the surplus places in Berriew, and I've also checked their intake for next September as well. So we do know that Berriew School have places, but we also recognise that Berriew School haven't got places for all the children in Castle Corinion, and we've said that from the outset. We also know that there are enough spare places in all the neighbouring schools to accommodate the children from Castle, and we also know through our conversations with some of the children that there are decisions being made already about some children moving to a certain school, some moving to another school, and we also know that when every time there's a school reorganisation proposal, parents tend to choose different schools. They don't always go en masse, and we've moved away from the practice that we used to have of having a named receiving school where all the children would go. So so I hope that reflects that question. What was your second? Sorry.
It was around the incorporation of housing growth.
Oh, growth, yeah.
In the numbers. It doesn't appear to be coming through in the figures that you've got. I'm looking particularly at the figures at the start of the community impact assessments, which is the easiest place to find the growth predictions.
Yeah, The predictions, we base predictions, we've got two sets of forecasts actually. So School Organisation Code requires us to publish 5 years worth of predictions, which we use the PLAS forecast that our statistician carries out for us on an annual basis. But in order to get a more accurate understanding of projections, we also use what we call the finance count figures, which is what the finance team work with the schools to get the next 3 years round of pupil numbers in order to set the budgets, etc. So those give us then the figure for the projections. In terms of the housing developments, yes, we are aware that there are housing developments, and that figure that the planning department use would indicate that from those housing developments there would be an additional however many number of children. But there is a big warning notice on using housing developments as a basis for predicting pupil numbers, because they could happen or they couldn't happen. You know, it's such a difficult one to understand and to predict. So we tend not to use those. However, having said that, even if those housing developments did produce children over time, Castle Corinion would still be a small school.
I'm not disputing that. My concern is actually more focused on Berrio, that you maybe, depending on how the numbers fall from movement out of Corinion, adding in if Berrio becomes established as the school to go to from Corinion, with the increasing in build numbers there and the increasing build numbers in Berrio itself, my concern is that we're looking at 2, maybe 3 years down the line, that the capacity at Berrio will be full, looking at your own figures.
Okay, and
that's my concern, what I'm trying to explore.
The council, my answer to that would be the council always has a duty always to consider pupil numbers and look at the capacity of its schools. If any school comes to a point where it's full to capacity, then the council has to think about how it's going to address it. And I would see, if that is a situation here, then the council would consider what would need to happen to Berrio schools should it become full.
Okay, Councillor Lucy, you're looking to come in.
Yeah, just I think, it's part of the same equation again, but one of the things, I don't think it's in the report, I may have missed it, but coming back to where the pupils actually live in relation to, would they be closer to Berrio or to Welshpool or to Guilsfield, or, do we have a clear picture across the current catchment for Castle Corinion, which would be the closest school for how many pupils? Sorry, not very clear, but hopefully you get the gist.
In the community impact assessment, we show how many, which would be the pupils' closest schools should Castle close. So I'm just looking into my document now. If you bear with me. There's so much paperwork.
I've got it, Marianne, if you're not there.
Yeah, go on then.
No, the community impact is which is the closest school at the moment. So it's showing that 75% are closest to Castle Corinion, but it doesn't answer the question if Castle Corinion didn't exist, what would be the closest school?
Bear with me. Further down.
All right, I've now found it. It's further down.
Yeah. Pupils closest school. Should there be no school in Castle Corinion?
Closest for.
Yeah. Berrio is closest for 70%. Welshpool is for 12%. Guilsfield for 8%. Corinion 4%, and Llanidloes 4%.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, I've missed that.
It does suggest that if pupils go to their closest school, that a very large percentage are going to be going to Berrio, which does 70% of 23. It does start to push Berrio very close to its capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything on that section? We've actually answered another one of my questions in that discussion. My next comment is around 6.2 and is focusing on the community impact and the concerns around the viability of the community centre. This is made more difficult, obviously, because it's a church in those schools. So what would happen with the school site is outside of the council's hands. But from the indications here, if what is being said by the people reporting in, closing the school probably means closing the community centre as well, because it's no longer financially viable. If that's the case, what is the plan for support of the preschool age group there? I did have a note of the name of it, which I can't find at the moment. And do you have concerns then about the viability of the community, given the number of activities that are linked to the combination of church, community centre and school?
From the information we've received, yes, there are concerns about the viability of the community centre, which is adjacent to the school. Community centre, according to the information received, is well used, a key part of the community, and comments have been made about it being a key part of the residents' well-being in terms of all the activities, etc., that can be provided. The school, according to the information received, is a main contributor to the finances of the community centre. You were quite right as well. The church, the diocese, owns the school building, and it would be up to the diocese then to decide what to do with the building should the school close. So our response there, our honest response there, should the school close, the management committee of the centre would need to consider how best to utilise the centre so that it remains viable. I'm not sure if Councillor Phil, have you got a view on that one? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Apologies, Marianne, just go over that. I just come off phone call. Apologies, I missed that.
Okay, we're talking about the community centre, and I said our response to the concerns raised about whether it's viable, should the school close, and we just put an honest response in to say, should the school close, the management committee of the centre would need to consider how best to utilise the centre so that it remains viable. I'm not sure what else the council could do.
I think in that respect, isn't it, you'd be directing the community centre group to the community council, and if it's valuable to the community, that then it would look to be included in any precept amount they may raise or similar. I think we've got to remember here we can't retain school sites based on a community centre when the whole point of S as a service is learner entitlement and the education of the child, isn't it? So that is the key aim for us, is that learner entitlement, and I think we need to be concentrating on that.
Hey, Angela, your hand has gone up.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of comments that sort of straddle a number of the appendices, really. But so my first one is, as a parent of 4 children, 2 went to a very small school, 2 classes, and 2 went to a much larger school. And when I was the parent of children in a very small school, I was very passionate about my school, very involved with the children's education. And I think I understand this community, their fear of change. And my concern is due to the comments made by the pupils of the school. The pupils are genuinely fearful that moving to a bigger school means they will lose friends, that they will be bullied, and they've got this idea that it's going to be a very negative move for them. And I've got real concerns about that because they have no experience of that. That's an impression that they have been allowed to foster, really. And I really want to sort of appeal to the officers that should this closure go ahead, that they work very closely with those pupils, because from my experience, moving to a bigger school with my younger children was actually a very positive thing. And I mirror some of the things Sandra said. What I now know, the big school really does offer more. You're still part of the community. You're still very involved with your children's education, but all those extracurricular, all those other things come into play as well. And then the second comment really around the community centre. Again, I understand that. I live in a very rural community. We don't have a building or a community centre or anything like that, but we have a strong sense of community. And really, I would again urge officers to work with the community to remind them that it's people that make a community, not buildings. So that's it, really.
Thanks, Angela. We'll come back to this in the community impact assessment. I'm aware of our time moving on, and I think in terms of my comments on this section, I'm done. Lynette, you want to come back in? Whilst you're coming in, if everyone else has a think, if they have anything more on Appendix B, and then when Lynette finishes, we'll move on to the impact assessments.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give assurances to Scrutiny and Angela there with that question around pupil wellbeing and the comments there. Just to say that, yes, indeed, we will be supporting the school if this proposal goes ahead. We already have put in a support for the head teachers at this time. Kath Thomas, some of you will know her, is working with our head teachers to help support them to work with the pupils around their well-being. And just to say as well, in terms of transition, as you rightly say there, Angela, from the small school to the larger school, we know from experience that the children are fine, they're going to be safe, all the things they think about the bigger school. We will work really closely with the schools to ensure an effective transition should the proposal go ahead.
Thank you, Lynette. I don't have any other hands, so can I ask people to turn to Appendix D, which are the impact assessments. There are the standard impact assessments and then the community impact assessment. So I'm going to take each of them in turn. Most of my comments, in fact, all of them relate to the community impact assessment, but I wonder whether anyone has looked in detail at either of the other two and have their comments. So if anyone has got comments on the integrated impact assessment, can they raise their hands now? And I'm seeing nothing. If anyone's got any comments on the equality impact assessment, can I see them now? Okay. Brings us on to the community impact assessment, and this one I want to spend a little bit of time on. We've discussed most of the things in here in response to the Appendix B. I'm looking through my notes. I had 5 notes. The first observation was around the catchment of origin and the fact that we don't know where the pupils that actually live in the Coronian catchment are going to school. We have raised this before in respect of other consultations. I think it would be helpful to Cabinet to have that information there. And I would request as part of future community impact assessments that information is included as standard, because the one thing we don't know at this point is whether we're talking about a very strong, close-knit community, but what we don't know is if 90% of the potential pupils within the catchment are going to the school or 10%. So we can't make that evaluation. That would be my first observation, but I think we've already had feedback on that. The second one was, and I've got the notes here, it's Sparks is the play group, and we don't really have an answer from that, but it is an observation that when we're looking at the questions around the community impact assessment and the facilities within the community, there's the question around Sparks and its viability if the school and or the community centre are not available. I don't know whether officers have any comment as to what support that group would be able to be given in that context.
Just to say, it's a non-funded play group, which I think meets. It doesn't meet every day of the week. In terms of what we could do to support it, I think that'll be a conversation we need with our early years provider, with the early years team.
Yeah, they're not currently funded by the early years.
Oh.
Because they do not provide 10 hours.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a potential community asset that is at risk. Is that a fair statement?
We don't have any information about the setting itself, sorry, so I couldn't say. It's not one that has applied to deliver the educational hours.
Okay. Again, as an observation for future reports, where there is a setting, whether it's a formal one that meets the 10 hours or not, it might be helpful within the community impact assessment for us to have more information about the impact of the proposal to close the school on that setting, so that we can evaluate the proposal in respect to the rural schools policy, and particularly the impact on community section. In respect of pupils from poorer backgrounds, we've raised a number of issues, particularly around transport and extracurricular activity. Is there anything else at this point that you'd like to share with us that you don't think we've explored around how pupils, let's use the free school meal as the indicator, how pupils with free school meals will be supported to ensure that they don't lose out from the fact that there are now transport or other issues to get to their new place of education?
Happy to come in there, Chair. Yeah, just to say that all schools in the area will have the PDG according to the number of free school meal pupils that they have in their schools. There's an expectation that PDG grant funding is allocated to those children that generate the funding, and all schools produce a PDG plan that is regularly monitored by the local authority to ensure that all children across the county who are eligible for free school meals are provided for appropriately within their schools. It's one of the vulnerable groups that we look at when we go in to visit schools, challenge advisor visits. So it's something that is monitored very carefully across the local authority.
Thank you for that, Lynette. Does anyone else have any comments on the the community impact assessment? I think we need to be mindful of the fact that because it is a rural school under the rural schools policy, we need to be aware and potentially take a view in reporting back from Scrutiny to the Cabinet about whether that policy has been met, or whether there are things that the Cabinet need to consider in particular detail when they're coming to their conclusions about whether it has been met. Okay, I'm not seeing any further concerns. So I think when we are writing this up, I think it's probably worth pulling out from the discussions that we've had any areas of concerns that we've identified specifically in relation to this area, so that the report we give back to Cabinet highlights the areas that they may wish to explore, given that they, and not us, are the decision makers in this area. In which case, I'm going to open up to everyone. Does anyone have any further comments or further questions in relation to this particular proposal? In which case, I will draw our discussions to a close. I will thank officers. There were a lot of questions that we put to you. I'd like to thank you for the level of detail you've given in response to those questions. I think this is in many ways quite a finely balanced decision. If you look at it purely from an educational perspective, you've made a very strong case, particularly around the size of the school, the lack of significant improvement in the number of pupils that are scheduled to be present, and the risks and challenges that the new curriculum will give to the school and the teachers in terms of being able to deliver it successfully. Looking at the responses, I am slightly concerned about the risk to the community. I think there are questions still to be answered there, particularly around the viability of the other community assets and the cohesion of the community linked to the school. But I think those concerns are issues that education cannot address. But if this decision were to go forward with closure, I would hope that the Education Department would work with other departments, particularly I'm thinking community, to provide support to the community hall team to help them explore how they can maintain that as a sustainable entity going forward without the resources coming from the school, so that that facility is not lost. That's my take from today. I would open it up to my colleagues here to ask whether anyone dissents from that analysis of what we've heard today, or whether anyone wants to expand on it in terms of additional input for me to take back to Cabinet. In which case, hopefully when you have that, and obviously if you don't, you can look back at the recording. I'd like to thank everyone for that today. I'd like to hand over to Wyn now to go through our forward work programme for next week and after the summer break.
Thank you, Chair. As you can see, the work programme set out on the agenda. Next items we've got up for next week's meeting are school budgets and budget outturn, and also the poverty report. September now, things are starting to change, and into sort of October and towards the end of the year, still in discussion with the service, obviously, and we're not certain about some of the reports, uncertainty of timescales, as I think that there could be some slippages, as you would expect in such a major transformation program. So that's to be reviewed between myself and the service, and we'll come back to you with greater detail as soon as we can, really. But we need to sort of firm up where precisely we are. So that's the current position as we have it.
My observation from today, and obviously we'll have some reflection in a few minutes, is that it's taken us 2 hours to go through what is a fairly straightforward proposal for a very small school without a major campaign running behind it. I've got very severe doubts that we can do 3 proposals in 2 hours, as is currently identified on the 21st of September. Does anyone agree or disagree with that analysis?
Yeah, I'd agree, Pete.
Lucy, I think you're coming in.
I would agree, and I think we need to be able to give them the full time that they deserve.
So that means, and it's something we're all going to need to be aware of, that probably means we are bearing in mind that Llanfihangel Dyson is not on that schedule. That means we're looking at potentially four sessions like this in September as proposals come forward. Phil, please come in.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Just, in touching on that, I think, a lot of the debate over educational benefit, etc., that we've had today will be exactly the same. So I would say that there would be a considerable reduction in time required to go over some of the points that officers have raised. I would say that, I wouldn't like to commit officers to another 4 of these sessions in September based on the sheer workload that is on at present. So I just think that the service and Wyn and yourself need to sit down and determine what's appropriate rather than agreeing it today, potentially.
I think we need to. I think I would agree with you that we need to highlight the point today. Having gone through the reports, I'll reflect on that in a minute. I think the key question is going to be around the breadth of the consultation responses. If we end up with consultations where there's 50 people saying the same thing, then obviously we're going to get through that in a lot more timely fashion than if we've got 100 all saying different things. So I think perhaps between now and August, we probably, myself and the Vice Chair, do need to sit down with yourself, Marianne, and look at the volume of response and the nature of response on all of these proposals. 2 are definitely closed, and the other 2 are, if they haven't closed, they're pretty imminent, if my memory serves me right. I've lost track because the number have been extended.
Yeah, they've all closed now, and the team are working through meticulously through all the responses. Just to say that the ones coming forward in September will have a larger volume of responses than this one. Just to add to it, it's a mammoth task, and September these reports are going to be big. So.
Yeah, well, bearing in mind that in order to get where I got to today, it took me about 5 hours going through, looking at what was there, trying to identify so that we could have a structured session. And I did notice that members were decidedly quieter than normal. So I think we do need to be aware of that, and possibly need to look at having slightly more time than the normal 7 days for an agenda for members to look through these. Again, we can talk about that. Margaret, you're looking to come in.
Yeah, just to say, I understand where Councillor Phil is coming from, and and it's got to be looked at because officer time is so important. But from the perspective of the schools we're discussing, they must feel also, mustn't they, that Scrutiny have given them a fair hearing and look at the issues, rather than, you know, thinking in terms of cutting it short.
I'd agree, Margaret. And before we move to this stage of the process coming to scrutiny, we would have been talking about officers coming to full council 4 times and having every single councillor in front of them. So I think it's important that we don't lose scope of that. And as we have said throughout, scrutiny is the bulwark for the decisions and is there to test what officers are saying to ensure that the decisions are robust and are the right decision. So I would be very cautious about trying to do more than one in a session. It might be some of these we can do in an hour and a half, but just the sheer volume of paperwork, if we have all 3 of these through, I'm expecting at least 2 of the ones that we've got scheduled for one meeting in September to run to over 500 pages. I may be proven wrong, but that could mean anything up to between 12 and 1500 pages for us as a committee to look through with just 7 days notice. I don't think that is realistic. Okay, Wynne, I'm looking there is nothing about Amber Hangul-Dyson, and I noticed the West has now moved into 2022. Do we have any indication when Amber Hangul-Dyson is coming, and whether there is anything else that is missing from that agenda that might require additional meetings?
There's a number of things, Chair, now in consultation with Marianne that have actually been moved at the moment onto a sort of provisional list, and we need to come back and actually look at the definitive in consultation with the service as to when they're actually coming now, and then plan it. And I think the best thing, as Councillor Phil says, is for us to take it away, sit down and actually have a look at it, because there's so many different factors in here in terms of trying to plan this, and we need to get it right. But also we've got to be mindful of all resources in terms of actually trying to deliver this as well. And I hear what members are saying, and I understand entirely where you're coming from. But this is a challenge for all of us, I'm afraid.
I couldn't agree more. And we've also got the fact that as a committee, we may have our own issues that we want to explore. So bearing that in mind, and the fact that we have been driven by the Cabinet agenda and the flow of official yearly reports, I'd like to extend the invite to everyone this week to think about whether there are specific areas of education that we might benefit from shining a light on. And next week, as part of our agenda there, we have a discussion where we look at areas that you'd like myself and David to take forward in discussion with the service as being areas that we might like to be looking at scrutinising outside of the modernisation and ALM process. So I will leave that with you. So without more ado, I'm going to move on to the reflection stage and ask people how they feel about how today went. And silence there was. Jake, come in.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I mean, it's felt quite slow as we've gone through the afternoon and discussed various elements of the paper, but I also think necessarily so. And I think some of the responses to the detailed questions which have been asked have been really helpful in building understanding of the issues there. So I think there's been some good questions and some thorough responses. I think my learning from it, though, Pete, is the worry that we've just been through, and I won't repeat that we're going to have the time and ability to repeat this with more complex cases going forward. But I think today has been useful, you know, and I'm sure it's required some stamina on your part and the part of officers to get us through it. So thank you for that. But I think the in-depth discussion has been really valuable, and that will, I hope, be regarded properly back by those worried within the community, that at least their concerns have been listened to before this goes on to Cabinet. Because the shame sometimes is with this is the first that people read of the reports is when they appear in a press release that Cabinet is making the decision next week, and it almost appears as if it's already made, and scrutiny doesn't get a mention in those press releases. And I think it's probably important that we just take care to reflect properly in those press releases. It doesn't make it look like the decision has already been made, and that we are actually properly scrutinizing and feeding changes where necessary into the process. So a bit of an observation there, Pete.
Thanks for that, Jake. Margaret?
Yeah, following on from that, really, it's been very useful, the information today, but it probably goes back to what we were able to do pre-COVID on occasions, where we had updates on specifics. And some of the things we've heard today, if on times in the things we've had in the past, where you have had updates on, say, the development of the new curriculum, we would have had some of that information, if you see what I mean. I just felt that that was something that we haven't been able to have during this last 18 months. And that was, so it would have been, had we had that information, which was given us very well today, we would have perhaps, you know, had more understanding.
Thanks for that, Margaret. I felt Delith's quite long response was actually very informative and very helpful, but I also felt it was something that we probably shouldn't have needed in today's session. It's something we should have probably known about to that level of depth. So that's why at the time I suggested we might need a briefing to bring us back up to date on how the new curriculum in particular has moved forward during COVID. Because other than stuff that's come to me through being a governor, I don't think I've had that for a while. And Phil, you're going to come in and you're probably going to say officers are really struggling with time. And I appreciate that. And I wonder how we can work on it.
No, I think it's important. It's something that the whole council needs to be aware of, not just scrutiny, because I think it is something that, and it is something that I've asked officers to put into a member development session. So as soon as we can factor one of them in, and obviously that would include, you know, the non-elected members of scrutiny that are present as well. So, you know, hopefully we can have that before, I'm hoping, before any further decisions are made, so it does give a better understanding. Because like you say, a lot is happening with curriculum, and if we had have been in the chamber and been able to have them meetings, I think you know, we would be in that better informed position. So no, I completely agree with that one. You know, it's far too important in that regard. All I'm trying to say is I just didn't want us to be going over the same topic needlessly, maybe potentially in some of these meetings, because we've all got you know, you've all got busy agendas as well, haven't you, and busy many other meetings to be attending and other issues on go. So it's just making sure we make the most of the time and scrutinise the areas of the decision that need scrutiny, and not going over the same ground potentially. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that. Bryn.
Yeah, I just like to add to that, really. It's a pity that Delith's contribution and I heard before it was necessary, but I think it is necessary because those arguments ultimately, if parents in the community understand those fully, most of the decisions that are trying to be made will be automatically understood. It is fundamental. It's all about entitlement and measurable differences at different school sizes and group sizes and cohort of staff, potential developments. They're all so important, but they seem to get left behind in the emotion of our local school, and as I think Angela was saying, it's people that make the community, not the buildings ultimately. That's why I did come in on the ad interjection with the same arguments apply entirely to dual stream schools, but I agree that it wasn't part of the today's discussion, but it needs to be made clear as day as often as possible.
Fair enough, and I let you get away with it. I noticed, one thing I noticed was that we do have members of the committee who've been here a long time, and a few that joined us in the last couple of months. And sadly, 2 of those have had to go away for other commitments. I can't ask this question of them, but there were limited contributions coming through from people today compared to some of our previous sessions. Is there any particular reason for that? Is there anything that support that we need to give to those of you that are fairly new onto the committee? I'm guessing here I'm looking to Jake and David more because everyone else has been with me for a while.
Pete, just to respond, no, not particularly. I mean, I contributed where I felt it was useful and followed the conversation, but didn't feel the need to keep chipping in as the matter was rolling on at its own pace and to a program that you'd set within the email you sent us earlier. So that was the only reason.
Okay, thanks for that, Jake. Okay, I'm going to offer my thoughts on this. Having put the time in to get a structured agenda and knowing the questions that I had to give us a debate was positive. It was a lot easier to chair, and I felt we got through it a fair bit quicker than when we looked at different training. One observation I think might help everyone. I looked at looking at everything when I had everything together, but the report that went out for consultation is the same as the report that went to Cabinet before going to consultation. So it might be beneficial to everyone when we know we've got a school coming up, that you take the time to read the consultation report while we're waiting for the full agenda pack to come through, because in this case it was about 1/5 of the reading, the reading time. So that would make things a little bit easier for people in observations, and thank you everyone else for theirs. And with that, I think unless anyone has any final comments. No final comments, in which case I thank you all. Wynne, if you would like to take